How's everybody doing? Good, I guess, since no one responded. So, I found out I was preaching about 4 hours ago. But lucky for you guys, I am in the Word 24/7. So, literally he texted me. I was like, that's fine, because I'm literally reading my Bible as we speak. That's just who I am. You know, for fun, I like to pray in tongues and what's Stranger Things? Am I right? I've actually already seen all season 3, so. In between that, though, I do have a really good word for you, so I'm excited. What I'm most excited about is I have a title for my message. I never have a title. People are like, what's your title? I'm like, the authority of God gives you the power to be healed and live the life that, and they're like, no, okay, you don't have a title. But I do have a title, and it's, what would Jesus do? Boom, right? Was anybody in here alive for that? It was ahead of its time. Imagine if that would have been a thing during the time of social media. It would have been huge, right? And I know we talk about it a lot, but this is the age of social media. We're in the age of exposure. We're in the age of no privacy, right? Everything we do is on display of some sort. But what that also gives us the ability to do is see what other people are doing. And the awesome thing about that is what you can do in life is you can find people that you want to live like and model your life after them. Whether it's a chef, and you want to learn how to cook, or an athlete that you want to mimic for a sport, or et cetera, et cetera. What you can do is you can watch them on social media, you can read articles, you can watch videos, however it is, and do what they do to try to get the same outcome, right? Which is awesome. For me personally, I used to be a runner. I was a runner. I was obsessed. Every 6 days a week, I was out there. And then we had a child. And since we've had a child, I've probably run twice, right? Use it as an excuse. No, I have a baby, I don't run. I spend time with him, I'm a good dad, okay? But I finally reached a point where I was like, I need something to get me motivated again. And so, naturally, oh, you probably signed up for a 5K or you 10K. No, I signed up for an Ironman. In case you're wondering what an Ironman is, it's a triathlon, 2.5-mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and a 26-mile run consecutively. I say if you're going to do it, just jump in, right? The thing about it is, 3 weeks ago, I followed 0 triathletes on Instagram. Now I follow 50, right? Because what I want to do is I want to see how they do it, what works for them, how they eat, when they train, so that I can mimic it to get the same results. The thing about doing that is while we mean it to be motivating, as time goes on and they get better and they get wealthier and they are happier and they go on better trips and you don't, what happens is what was motivating becomes bitterness, right? We watch online and we try to mimic these people, and as it becomes less attainable for us, what we meant to be a motivating factor can be a cause of distress or depression or sorrow in our life. And I think that it can happen spiritually. We follow pastors on Instagram and we watch messages, and even the What Would Jesus Do movement. We have these people that we're trying to mimic, and in your life as you mess up, or you don't have the opportunity to help people as much as others, or these things happen in your life, and your life is not looking as good as these people's life are, what was meant to be encouraging becomes discouraging, right? And so where this message came to me from was, we strive to live our lives like Jesus lived his life, but at times it can seem unattainable. So what I was doing is, I was reading about Jesus. I love the Gospels. I've read them more times than I can count. But what really popped out to me and what I want to talk about is the humanity of Jesus the man, right? Because Jesus was a man. And that's actually my first point. I have 5 points for you. I have enough points to fit on my iPhone. Not too good with the notes. But point number 1 is Jesus was a man. And I think this is important because we like to think of Jesus as a man. Jesus was a man, but he was God's son. You know, he gave him like a little extra juice. Like he wasn't totally man. Like to be able to do what he did, he had to be God. No, Jesus was a man. He was flesh. He took on the genetics of Mary. He was born. He grew up in the world that we live in, right? And his circumstances aligned with the symptoms of the world, just like ours do. If it was hot, he sweated. If he didn't eat, he was hungry. If he stayed out in the heat too long, he got a headache and he got dizzy. Like he was subject to the symptoms just like we were, right? And this is important because when we try to mimic our lives off of him, it's important to know that he was in the same playing field that we are, you know? And a couple examples of that. Matthew 4, Jesus is just about to start his ministry. So he goes up into the mountain so that Satan will tempt him. I love that. That's how it says it in the Bible. He didn't go up into the mountain and then Satan tempted him. He went up into the mountain so Satan would come tempt him. And what he did is he lured Satan by fasting. He fasted for 40 days and for 40 nights, and it says afterwards he was hungry, right? He was starving. He was thirsty. He wasn't in the best attitude probably. He wasn't in a great mood. He was in the perfect place for Satan to come tempt him, right? Because that's when Satan comes. When you're at your weakest, Satan's going to show up, right? And that's how I know that Jesus was subject to the conditions, is because Satan showed up to tempt him, right? This story wouldn't mean anything if Jesus wasn't hungry, if Jesus didn't feel starving, if he didn't feel nourished. But his digestive system, his body worked exactly how ours did. Second one is Matthew 26:36. It's when Jesus is going to Gethsemane. Judas has already planned to betray Jesus, and he's going there to pray. And this has become one of my favorite paragraphs in the Bible. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go there and pray.' He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death.'" Who here has ever been so overwhelmed that they had dark thoughts, right? You've been so overwhelmed and stressed that your thoughts started to get off. Jesus did, right? He said, "My soul is so overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," right? He dealt with the consequences. He had to do something he did not want to do, and he felt it, right? He dealt with that. Here's the thing about symptoms. Symptoms are simply consequences of being in your surroundings, right? We glorify them into saying symptoms, we must be talking about sickness. No, it's what applies to where you are. We're in Oklahoma. It gets hot. We're going to sweat. We have to deal with the symptoms of our surroundings, right? Jesus did just as well. But here's the thing is, symptoms are just symptoms. But this is important, and you might want to write this down. Symptoms are Satan's number one form of temptation, right? Because here's the thing is, when we think of temptation, we think of sin. Like we like to think of alcohol, drugs, pornography, things that are sinful. That's how Satan tempts us. But Satan's goal is not to get us to live a life of sin. Satan's goal is to lead us down to destruction, right? For some people, that's through sin. But for me, is it more likely that Satan's going to tempt me with alcohol, or is it more likely that Satan's going to tempt me with a lump on my skin that he convinces me is cancer, right? What is just a symptom, Satan wants you to believe is more. That's what he's going to tempt you with, and so that you lead a life down to destruction. But the good news is Jesus dealt with those. Jesus dealt with the symptoms just like we did, and he lived a sinless life, right? Point number 2 is be patient. In Luke 2, Jesus is just a child, and he goes with his parents to Jerusalem for Passover. And Mary and Joseph leave to come home, and they realize they don't have Jesus, right? So they go back to Jerusalem, and they find him in the temple, and he's talking with the priests, and he's asking questions, and they're in awe of what he knows and the questions he's asking and the wisdom he has. And so finally, they get him, and they say, "Jesus, it's time to go home." And in verse 52, sorry, my phone keeps locking. In verse 52, it says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man." You see, at that time, Jesus was probably all ready to do what he came here to do, right? He was a man, but he was the Son of God. They said they marveled at his wisdom and what he knew. He was probably already equipped. But what he was supposed to do wouldn't have been the same if he was a child and didn't grow to become the man he was. It wouldn't have been as accepted if he would have moved forward as a child to try to do what he was going to do. He needed to become the man to become the Savior and the Christ, right? It says he grew in wisdom and stature. He was patient because God had a plan and he had not told him that it was time to move forward yet. And what I love about this is this exact verse is said about one other person in the Bible, and that's Samuel. So Samuel's mom, Hannah, was barren. She couldn't have any children. And so she makes a deal with God. She says, "God, if you give me a child, I'll devote him to you for his entire life." And so God gives her Samuel, and she immediately gives him to the temple to become a priest. And so Samuel's growing up in the temple, and he's becoming very wise, and he's becoming very favored, and people love him. And during that time, Eli was the head priest, and his sons were over Samuel, and they were awful. They stole the offerings, they broke the law, all this stuff. And it's going down this list of things that Eli's sons are doing, just how terrible they are. And then all of a sudden, it gets to 1 Samuel 2:26, and it says, "And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and favor with the Lord and people." It could have easily said, "And Samuel turned them into the authorities so that they were arrested." Or it could have said, "And Samuel told Levi about what his sons were doing so that they were thrown out of the temple." But it wasn't his time yet. The appointment that he had and the plan that God had for him was more important than the plan that he had for himself. God had not said, "It's time for you to move forward. It's time for you to become the priest yet." And so he was waiting for the appointed time, and he grew in wisdom and stature. He was patient because he knew what God had planned for him was greater than his own plans for himself. Number 3 is get a squad, right? Roll deep. When Jesus left the mountain after being tempted by Satan to start his ministry, the very first thing he does is build his team, is get his disciples, right? Jesus, the Son of God, the wisest man on earth, our Christ, knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a team there with him. I love it because in that verse when he's in Gethsemane, he's feeling that sorrow and he's having these thoughts. And the first thing he does is he tells Peter and James and John, right? You have to have people that you can tell things to. When you have these thoughts that come your way and Satan's tempting you, you have to have people that you can tell, right? Jesus had to have those people. That means we should probably have those people as well. One thing that Pastor Bill always says that I love is he doesn't care what you're doing, he cares who you're with, right? Which is so true. You're going to do whatever the people you're with do. But I am 100% certain that the worst person that you can spend all your time with is yourself, right? Jesus went up into the mountain by himself so that Satan would come. When you're by yourself, Satan's going to come. Just guarantee it. Sorry, I'm flying through these points. I have to think of more to talk about for 4. Number 4 is know there are people watching, right? If you choose to live a life of Christ, you don't get to live for yourself anymore. But the trick with it is you have to live a life where other Christians want to mimic your life, but you're not off-putting to the world, right? That's what Jesus was the best at in the world, is he lived a life for his followers to mimic, but he was also accepting to everyone. And one of my favorite verses in the Bible is he's eating with tax collectors, and the Pharisees are judging him. They're like, "Why are you eating with sinners? Why are you not eating with your disciples? Why are you not eating with Christians?" And he says, on hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need the doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Here's the thing is, no one is fully healthy, right? That's why we have to have Jesus. That's the whole trick with what he's saying here is, didn't come to call the righteous, I came to call the sinners. We've all sinned. He wasn't judging. He said, these people need it, so I'm going to be with them. These people need Jesus. You need Jesus. You need Jesus, right? Don't be off-putting to the outsiders, but still live a life that honors God, that still you be proud of people mimicking. And the fifth point is find your purpose. That's the thing that ties them all together. You see, we're all very clear on what Jesus' purpose was on earth, right? To become the perfect sacrifice, become the atonement for our sins. But the thing is, that's just a piece of Jesus' purpose, the part that we focus on the most. But there's really an important piece that I've been dwelling on a lot lately, and it's when God created Adam and Eve, he created them into this perfect world as perfect beings supposed to live forever, right? And then Satan entered into the world, and he tempted them and caused them to sin. And what happens is when you sin, the wages of sin is death. Death entered the world for the first time. Up to that point, nothing in the world had ever died, right? That's not God's nature. God doesn't kill. When God cast Satan out of heaven, he did not kill Satan. He casted him into the world. This is important. If God does not kill Satan, he's not killing you. When you hear people say, oh, God took him, or God's doing this, if he didn't do it to Satan, he's not going to do it to you, right? I'm pretty sure, right? But what happened was sin and death entered into the world, and what happened is that made Satan the master of death, right? The first death that had ever happened was through Satan. That gave him the keys to death and the grave. And what happened is this creation that God had made to have a relationship with him, a rift had been formed. A veil had been put between God and his creation, his loved people. And as generations went on and people started being born and more sin came into the world and people started becoming further and further away from God, God was in heaven separated from his creation, wanting a way to have a relationship but not able to. And so trying to think of a plan to be able to get his people back. And I know like a lot of people are thinking, well, why didn't he just go and take the keys? Here's the thing about hell is not an actual place. It was not created. God did not create hell. Hell is death. Hell is the state of being dead. Therefore, God cannot go there because God is the God of life. God does not know death. God does not know sin. He does not exist in hell. Hell is only a place for death. As Christians, when our physical bodies die, we go from this life into eternal life. The only time you die is when you sin and you don't know God and you're separated from God and you go to hell, which is death, right? That's where Satan had the keys to death. Were there. And so he had to find a plan to be able to take those keys back. That's where Jesus enters. Jesus' whole purpose in coming to the earth was to go to hell. You see, for God to be able to get to hell, he had to become immortal. He had to become a man so that he could physically die. But you see, Jesus couldn't just come to earth to die. That couldn't be the whole story. There had to be things that happened first. He had to live a sinless life, right? Because what happens when you sin, you get chains from Satan. Satan gets entrance into your life. You give him access to have dominion in your life. Therefore, Jesus had to live a sinless life. He had to have a relationship with God, right? Naturally, it was his Father, so that was an easy one, right? And then when he died, he had to choose to go to hell. Because that's the only way that he could be a real sacrifice, is if he actually chose to do it and it wasn't against his will, right? So what happened is Jesus came to earth, lived a perfect life, died on the cross, chose to go to hell. And here's the cool part is when he got to hell, he didn't take the keys to life in the grave. He walked up to Satan and he said, give them to me. Because he had a relationship with God. He had not sinned. He had chosen to go there. He had his authority. We have the authority over Satan. He didn't lose that. And therefore, Satan had no choice but to give him the keys to life in the grave, right? Now, here's the thing. Jesus would not have lived the life that he did as a man if he didn't have a clear understanding of what his purpose was, right? He knew what his purpose was. He understood the gravity of his purpose in becoming a man. Therefore, when he became a man, his actions aligned with it. His words aligned with it. The steps he took aligned with his purpose, right? So if you look and examine your life and where it is right now, and your life isn't where you want it to be, and the things you're saying aren't what you want to be saying, and the people that you're with aren't the people that you want to be with, it's because you haven't found your purpose yet. When you find your purpose and you align your life to it and you're committed to it, your life follows. What you do follows. What your actions follow. What you say follow that. It all has to do with finding your purpose, though, right? Jesus knew his purpose. Therefore, he came and he couldn't sin. He chose to die for us, right? He did all of that so that we could get together like this every week, for some people every day, and evaluate where your life is at and say, is your life right with God? Because let me tell you something. God sent his son to become immortal and atone for our sacrifice so that we could have a relationship with him. He wants a relationship. I love thinking about it like that because it shows just how far God wanted to go to win us back, right? We turned from him and he threw his son at us because he wanted us, right? So here's the deal. If you're in this place right now and your life's not right with God, your life isn't in the place where you want it to be, if you take a look at your life right now and you say, where I'm at right now is not where I planned, we can fix that today.